Hashem. Today's daf yomi is Zevachim daf nun zayin, Zevachim 57, but we're going to start on the bottom of 56b, right after the Mishnah. The Gemara says, Mantana, who is the author of our Mishnah? And Rashi explains what the Gemara's question is, that by Meiser and Pesach, that with respect to the question of Meiser and Pesach, that our Mishnah compares that just the same way you apply the blood of the Bechor, which is through Zrika, through throwing the blood, so too you apply the blood of Bechor and Meiser, the firstborn animal and the Meiser. So the Gemara wants to know who's the author of our Mishnah who says that. So Amar Rav Chisda, this is Rabbi Yossi Aglili. And remember, Rabbi Yossi Aglili will be coming back to him in our daf, to Tanya. Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer, Chalbo lo namar. It does by the firstborn animal when it says in the pasuk that you shall. It says in the pasuk, it says in this pasuk, it says Ach b'chor shor b'chor kasef u'b'chor eiz lo tifteh kodeshim estamam tizro kol mizbeach v'eschalbam taftir. It doesn't say it's fat; it says their fat. It's referring to more than just the firstborn. And so it doesn't say chelbam, it doesn't say chalbo, it says chalbam. And damo and emor, it doesn't say its blood. Ela damam, but their blood. We made al bechor meiser u'pesach. So it teaches us that bechor is the same halacha as meiser and pesach. She'tu'unin matan damim ve'imur l'gamei amizbeach. And so that they require the application of their blood thrown onto the altar, just like the Bechor. And Keneged HaYesod Mano. And how do we know that this Rika has to be opposite to Yesod, which means on the north and the western side, and not on the southern and the eastern side? How do we know that? Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Asya Zrika Miola. We learn out the Zrika from the Karban Ola, as we saw earlier in our Masechta, back on Daf Nun. Back on Daf Nun Gimel, it said, "Dichsev al Yesod mizbach ha'olah limed al olas chova shetu'una Yesod." This teaches that the olah is required to be thrown. The blood of the olah has to be required onto the Yesod. And Mar says, "Well, imal on shtei matana shein arba." Maybe just like the olah, which is two applications that are four. Maybe by Bechor Meiser and Pesach, it doesn't require one zrika, but two applications that are four. Avkan shtei matana shein arba. So Amar Abaye, no, because it says by an olah, a word that doesn't appear by Bechor Meiser and Pesach, and that is the word of saviv. Well, it says Abaye lamulim lemiltav saviv. Why does it say the word saviv around by an olah and saviv by a chatos? So that teaches us the principle of l'shnei ksuv and aban ke'echad. These are two verses that come together, and anytime you have two verses that come together, ein malamdin, we do not derive anything from there. This teaches us that whenever you have two verses coming together, we don't derive anything from them. According to the one who says we do derive something from them, what would you say? That you can't learn halacha if there is two. So Gemara says, no, avi asham shlosha. No, because the asham is a third example where it says saviv, and vishlosha vadayim ladim. Whenever time you have three verses that teach something, you can't derive a larger rule from it, because that's why the Torah says it only by those three psukim. So then it said in our Mishnah, so in halachos about the Bechor, it says that the Bechor is nechal, eaten by the Kohanim, and it's eaten by all the city, and eaten by all types of ways of eating it for 2 days and 1 night. So the Gemara says, the Brisa, how do we know that the Bechor is eaten? That the firstborn animal, you can eat it like a shlamim for 2 days and 1 night. So the Gemara says, how do we know this principle? That the Bechor can in fact be eaten for 2 days and 1 night. The Gemara says, as it states, Uvesaram, says in the pasuk, Uvesaram ielach tachazeh hatinufal kishol kayamin. So the pasuk explicitly says that the meat of the firstborn animal will be for you like the breast and the thigh, kishol kayamin. So just like the breast and the thigh of the shlamim, ma The Gemara compares the Bechor to the breast and the thigh of the Shlomim. Just like the Shlomim is eaten for 2 days and 1 night. So we compare the Bechor to the Shlomim, just like the Shlomim is eaten for 2 days and 1 night. Also, the Bechor is eaten for 2 days and 1 night. The Gemara says, "Vizu she'ela nishalo lefnei chachamim b'kerem b'yavneh." This actual conversation came up before the chachamim in the vineyards of Yavneh. Why is it called the vineyards? Rashi says, Talmid Chachamim, it wasn't a vineyard of Yavneh. That's how they studied Torah. They were called a vineyard. Because Talmid Chachamim Yoshvin Shuro Shuros Kekarim. Rashi says, like the Yerushalmi Talmud explains, that the Torah scholars would sit in rows and rows like a vineyard. And so therefore, that's why it was called a Kerem b'Yavneh. Hold on 1 second. So anyway, so this was a question that arose in Kerem b'Yavneh, and the question was asked, Bechor kama nechal. So how many days can the firstborn meat be eaten for? So Nana Rabbi Tarfon was there, but Amar Shnei Yamim v'Laylecha. You have 2 days and 1 night, like a regular Shlomim. Hayasham Talmid Echad. There was one student there, Shabala Beis Medrash Lefnei Chachamim Tchila. There was one student there who was his first day in the Beis Medrash. He finally got there. The Rabbi Yossi Aglili Shemo, and this is Rabbi Yossi Aglili. By the way, we just learned that this Mishnah that we cited is the Mishnah of Rabbi Yossi Aglili. So now we see that the first day that Rabbi Yossi Aglili shows up. And he said, wait 1 second, why do you know this? How do you know that the Bechor can be eaten for 2 days and 1 night? How do you know that the firstborn animal is eaten for 2 days and 1 night? How do you know that? Amrlo Rebbe Minayoncha. How do you know this basic question? How do you know this basic question? Sometimes the students who come the first day are the ones who ask the most simple questions, but also the most important questions. What's your source? Where do you have the idea that the Bechor is eaten for 2 days and 1 night? So Rabbi Tarfon says, Amrlo, B'ni, my son. He was not worried or threatened by the question. He's called him his son. Shlomim kachim kalam, u'Bechor kachim kalam. We know that a Bechor is considered the type of carbon called kachim kalam. Just like a Shlomim is eaten for 2 days and 1 night. So to a firstborn, the animal is eaten for 2 days and 1 night. So that's why he says we compare it to Shlomim. They have 2 days and 1 night. Amrlo says to him, Rebbe, Bechor matana l'kohen v'chatas v'asha matana l'kohen. So Rabbi Yosef says, wait 1 second. Maybe it's not eating like a regular Shlomim. Maybe since it's a gift to the Kohen and the owners don't partake of it, maybe it's going to have the same law as a chatas and asham. Chatas and asham, just like chatas and asham, you have 1 day and 1 night. Also, the firstborn animal, you have 1 day and 1 night. So Rabbi Yosef is not accepting. He's challenging the idea that the Bechor is a Shlomim. Amrlo nidon davar midavar v'nomo davar midavar. He says, no, let's compare it and we'll see what's going on here. Ma'as Shlomim ein ba'in al chet. Just like a carbon Shlomim does not come for a sin. Af Bechor eino ba'al chet. Also, the firstborn animal doesn't come for a sin. And Ma'as no Shlomim nechol m'shnei yom v'layla echad. Af Bechor nechol m'shnei yom v'layla echad. Just like a Shlomim is eaten for 2 days and 1 night, also a Bechor. So Amrlo, Rabbi Yossi Agli responds to Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi nidon davar midavar and yoma davar midavar. No, there's a different comparison. Chatos v'asham matana l'kohen and bechor matana l'kohen. Both the chatos and the asham are gifts to the kohen. The owner gets no part of it. So too with respect to the bechor, ma chatos v'asham ein ba'im b'neder and davar. Just like the chatos and the asham cannot be brought willingly, meaning voluntarily. Af Bechor eino b'neder and davar. Also, the Bechor cannot be brought voluntarily. It's you're either firstborn animal or you're not. Just like chatas and asham are eaten for 1 day. Af Bechor nechol yom echad. So too, the Bechor should only be eaten for 1 day. So Rabbi Yosef Glili is challenging Rabbi Tarfon's teachings. So Kafat Rabbi Akiva v'Nistalek Rabbi Tarfon. The first day Rabbi Yosef shows up, he's giving Rabbi Tarfon, he's challenging him, giving him a run for his money. So Rabbi Akiva came in to help. Kafat Rabbi Akiva. When it comes to Torah, we have to jump. He jumped. Rabbi Akiva jumped up. V'Nistalek Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon departed. Amar lo. So Rabbi Akiva, again, he wants to prove that the Bechor is in for 2 days and 1 night. So he says, back to Rabbi Yossi Agluli, he says to him, by the way, that coffee is what you asked for. It's chetzi chetzi. It's a mixture. We'll see if he tasted different. So he says, Amar lo. So he says, Rabbi Akiva says, I'm going to take the place of Rabbi Tarfon. And he says, Harei omer u'besaram yelach. It says by the pasuk about the Bechor, their meat shall be for you. Ikishin akasav u'chaza v'shel shlamim. Since as a besaram yelach kachazeh kashok, kachazeh tenufal kashok yamin. The pasuk explicitly compares the meat of the Bechor to the meat of the shlamim. Ma shlamim nechol shayam v'alachad, af Bechor nechol shayam v'alachad. So just like the shlamim is eaten for 2 days and 1 night, also the Bechor is eaten for 2 days and 1 night. So he's that's Rabbi Akiva's response. So Amarlo, so Rabbi Yossi Aglili responds, Harei omer uvesaram yelach. The pasuk already says that you have the meat. She'ein tamu omar. Excuse me, I skipped a line. Amarlo ikishasa l'chazav v'shok shel shlamim. So Rabbi Yossi Aglili says you compared it to the chaz and the shok of the shlamim. The shlamim is not the only animal where, it's not the only carbon where the chaz and the shok are given to the kohen. Also, the toda is another example where of a carbon where the chaz and the shok are given to the kohen, and the toda is only in for 1 day and 1 night, not 2 days. So he says, "Kishas chaz and shok shel shlamim, ani makishal chazek shel toda." So just like the toad is eaten for 1 day and 1 night, also the firstborn animal. So when Rabbi Akiva hears this, he retreats from his position. Remember, what was his argument? The argument was that the pasuk compares it to the chazah and the shok of the shlamim. So when he hears the argument, no, maybe the pasuk is comparing it to the toda, he retreats. And Amar always says, I'll give you a different answer. It's a reboy of the verse. It's an extra word in the verse. It says the meat shall be for you. Why does it have to say it'll be for you a second time? Why does it say it? The Torah is telling us another halacha with respect to the firstborn, that you have an extra day to eat it. So that's what the Torah is telling us. So that you should do this comparison. So then the Gemara says that so basically where we are in the discussion is that Rabbi Yishmael, that the Brisa says that you have 2 days and 1 night to eat the firstborn animal. Shows up a student on the first day of Torah study, and that's Rabbi Yossi Agluli's first day in the yeshiva. He says, what's your source? So Rabbi Tarfon tried to prove it from the pasuk that it compares it to shlamim. He says like Kachim Kalam. So, and Rabbi Yossi Aglili was challenging those comparisons. So then Rabbi Akiva says that from the pasuk compares it directly to the shlamim. So Rabbi Yossi Aglili again responds to that. It says maybe it's compared to the toda. So therefore, Rabbi Akiva says no, it's from the extra words in the verse, not from the hakesh. It's from the extra words l'chayiyah. So that teaches us that you can have 1 extra day to eat the bechor. So the Gemara now says that when Rabbi Shmuel heard this, Kishenemru Devara Lifnei Rabbi Shmuel, when Rabbi Shmuel was made aware of this conversation, Amar Lahan, he says to his students, go back to Rabbi Akiva and say, Ta'ita, you made a mistake. You should never have retreated from your argument. What was Rabbi Akiva's argument? That it says in the pasuk, that the Torah compares it to the Bechor, to the Shlomim, just like the Shlomim is even for 2 days and 1 night, because it's compared to the Chazer Shok of Shlomim. And so therefore you have 2 days and 1 night. It says that you should never have been scared away by his question about the Toda. He says, Ta'ita me'echalam mishlamim. He says, the whole source of Rabbi Akiva's argument was from the carbon Shlomim. And you want to say Toda me'echalam. Rabbi Yosef Guli said, no, maybe it's being compared to a Toda. It can't be, because why? Where's the whole concept of a Toda that you have 2 days and 1 night to learn it from? That's only learned out from the Shlomim itself. The Toda is learned out through a Hekesh to Shlomim. So now you want to teach from a Toda to a Hekesh to a Bechor, to a comparison to Bechor. You can't do that, because we've established something that's learned out from a Hekesh cannot go back and teach you a Hekesh. So therefore, go back and tell Rabbi Akiva he made a mistake. He should never have retreated from his first argument. So the Gemara says, but presumably Rabbi Akiva also has to hold Davar Lama Behekesh, Eno Chozer Malama Behekesh. That's something that's learned through a comparison can then not go and teach you another comparison. So back to the text of our Gemara, that it says, "Go tell Rabbi Akiva Ta'ita Toda Me'echalam the Mishlam Chadavar Lama Behekesh Chozer Malama Behekesh Ha'eno Lachol Adum B'Lashon Achrona B'Lashon Rishon." Go back to your first position. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel, what does Rabbi Shmuel do with the words, which is what Rabbi Akiva said was the source that the Bechor gets 2 days and 1 night. You have 2 days and 1 night to the firstborn animal. What does Rabbi Shmuel do with that? He says, he says, no, it's teaching us about a firstborn animal, even though it has a blemish and it can't be brought as a korban, it still has to be given as a gift to the Kohen. We never find that explicit anywhere in the Torah. Rabbi Akiva, how does he know that? He learns that from the fact that the pasuk says uvisaram, their meat shall be for you. Plural, whether it's a tam, whether it's an animal without a blemish, or chad b'amum, or whether it's a blemish, it goes to the Kohen. One is a korban, one will be chulin. Rabbi Shmuel mi bisaram dahanach b'choros kamar. Rabbi Shmuel says, no, it's the meat from those animals that have to be brought as a firstborn, i.e. the bull, the goat, and the sheep. So now the Gemara says, but my kamiflage, what is really the source of the dispute between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva? Remember, Rabbi Akiva tried to say, we compare the Bechor to the Shlomim from the words Chazel Shok, and Rabbi Yosef said, no, it should be compared to the Toda. And Rabbi Akiva retreated from that, whereas Rabbi Shmuel said, no, you don't have to worry about the Toda, because the Toda itself is a Hekesh. So what's the nature of the dispute between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel? Because Rabbi Akiva should also say that something that's learned out from a Hekesh cannot go and teach you a Hekesh. So b'mai kamiflagi. Mar explains, Mar Savar, one of them is at the position, Hey manu v'davar acher have a Hekesh. Umar Savar lo have a Hekesh. So what are we talking about? That Heimenu v'davar acher. So this law that of the eating of the chazan and the shok of the toda. So the idea that you have to eat the chazan and the shok of the toda, in that sense, it's learned out from the shlomim, because just like a shlomim, the Kohen gets the breast and the thigh. Also by a toda, the Kohen gets the breast and the thigh. But the idea that you only eat the toda, the Kohen only has 1 day and 1 night from it, that's not learned out from the shlomim, because that's a unique law to the Toda. So, achilot chazav v'shok, not unique throughout the entire corpus of the law, but unique vis-a-vis the Shlomim. So, achilot chazav v'shok, Rashi says the eating of the chazav and shok of the Toda yom v'layla is considered heimenu v'davar achar hemida, meaning state part of it is learned out from a Hekesh, but part of it is not. Meaning part of it is written by the Toda, that you get 1 day and 1 night, and part is learned by comparing it to the Shlomim. So we have a case, and we want to know if the Toda can now teach to the Bechor. Do we say that the law that the Toda is the chazan shok of the Toda is eaten by the Kohen for 1 day and 1 night by the Toda? Is that something that is derived through a Hekesh, or is that something that's derived uniquely from the Toda? In which case, if it is uniquely to the Toda, then it can go and teach it to the Bechor. But part of the law is derived from the Shlomim. So Rabbi Shmuel Savar Hekeshu. Rabbi Shmuel says that if we say Heimenu v'davar acher, Rabbi Shmuel says back to the text of Gemara. Mar savar imenu v'davar haver acher have hekesh. Mar savar lo have hekesh. So one is of the position that it's a hekesh, and so therefore. So Rabbi Shmuel's other position, Heimanu v'davar acher, the halacha that's written by it, and something else that is applied to it, another law, is considered to be of a hekesh, and so therefore it can't go back and teach. And so therefore, even though the time of the Toda is explicit, because it says biyom karbano ye'achel o yaniach mibenu aboker, and so therefore we say explicitly even though the time is explicit, nevertheless, since the giving of the Chazal Shok to Kohanim is not explicitly shared by the Toda, it's learned out from the Shlamim. Therefore, you cannot go and teach the Bechor because Rabbi Shmuel's of the position. And so therefore. And so therefore he says you can't learn out from it. Whereas Rabbi Akiva's other position, lo ave hekesh. Rabbi Akiva's other position, that which we're coming to learn from the Chazal Shok of the Toda, which is itself learned out from Shlamim, is not going to be considered like a limud because it itself is learned out through a hekesh. That it itself is learned out through a hekesh because even though there's a hekesh to teach us Toda from Shlamim, that doesn't teach us about the specific amount of time. And so therefore, it's not going to be considered something that's a hekesh, and therefore go back and teach through a hekesh. And so therefore, since that's the case, Rabbi Akiva was accepting Rabbi Yossi Aglili's response when he said, oh, you could compare it to Toda. He said, you know what, you're right, you could compare it to Toda because Toda is not something that's learned out from a hekesh. And whereas Rabbi Shmuel says, no, even though part of the Toda is not learned out from a hekesh, other part is. And so therefore, he could reject the challenge Rabbi Yossi Aglili made. So that's the basic principle. Rabbi Shmuel says, Himenu v'davar acher is still considered a hekesh, whereas Rabbi Akiva does. The Gemara is now going to bring two other examples where we say doesn't disprove that even though it's Himenu v'davar acher, it's going to be considered like it's not a hekesh, and so therefore that's a challenge to Rabbi Shmuel. So the Gemara says two other examples. The first is by the bull and the goat of Yom Kippur, because we know here. Let's read the text inside. Which makes sense according to Rabbi Akiva. That's why when the Torah tells us about sprinkling the blood of the bull and the goat in Yom Kippur, it says, thus you shall do in the Olam Moed, which means just like you sprinkle in the Holy of Holies 1 up and 7 below from the blood of the bull, so too you do in the sanctuary. And just like you do 1 up and 7 below from the blood of the goat in the sanctuary, so too you do in the Holy of Holies, so too you do it in the sanctuary. And what's going on here? That Rashi says that this idea of Ufnai V'Ufnim, that it says 1 above and 7 below in the Holy of Holies by a bull and a goat, that's an example of Himenu v'davar acher, because the fact that we are supposed to go 1 up by the bull is not explicit. Just 7 below is explicit by the bull, and 7 below is not explicit by the goat. It's just 1 up that's explicit by the goat. So the fact that we have 1 up and 7 below by both of them is an example of hekesh and also davar acher, because each of them have their own law that's written there. And so therefore, the fact that we can learn from there to the sanctuary is an example of Himenu v'davar acher. And so therefore, how are we able to learn it out from the inner holies to the sanctuary? So according to Rabbi Akiva, who says it's not a hekesh, it's okay. But according to Rabbi Shmuel, it's a question. So let's read it in text. So, but according to Rabbi Shmuel, who says that Oman Amar Have Hekesh, according to Rabbi Shmuel, it says, "Hey, men of a Dever Achar is a Hekesh." You can't learn out. How do we know that you sprinkle the blood of the bull and the goat in the sanctuary? So the Gemara says, remember, what would you have to say? Makomosu de Gamri Me'adada. You'd have to say it's not going and turning it out and relearning it through a Hekesh, because in the first Hekesh, it teaches us about animals, and the last Hekesh is just comparing the places. But by the Tod and the Bechor, it's a more connected Hektish, and that's why Rabbi Shmuel would say it wouldn't work, because it's the animals itself. Here, we're just first we compare the sprinklings, and then we compare the places. So they're two separate concepts. That meaning to say, it's a totally new Hekesh, and so therefore not going back to the other Hekesh. You're just learning a completely new Hekesh about comparing the places. Or alternatively, Bayasema Chutz Mipnim Bechad Zimna Gamar. Or alternatively, the whole thing, just the opposite answer. The whole thing is all learned together. So it's not Hekesh Chutz or Mlam Hekesh. It's all one Hekesh to begin with. So that's how we'd have to answer it. So the Gemara says, Bishlam, another example of this type of case, Bishlam Mandar Hekesh, I know Siv. This relates to this relates to the 2 loaves of bread that are brought on Shavuos. What is a taviu? To teach us the other type. There are 2 examples of chametz loaves in the Torah. One is the 2 loaves of bread on Shavuos, and the other is 10 of the 40 loaves of bread that are brought as part of the Korban Todah come from chametz. So to tell you, kol shataviu mimakom achar hareu kazeh. That there's a similarity. Just like by the 2 loaves of bread, it's an isaron l'chala, that each loaf is made up of an isaron of flour. Avkan, also by the lach metoda, each loaf is an isaron l'chala. And maybe by the 2 loaves of bread, maybe just like by the 2 loaves of bread, it's going to be a total of 2 Yisronim. Also by the 10 loaves of the chametz, Avkan Shnei Yisronim, Tamom Tiyena, to tell us no, that it's 1 Yisron for each loaf. But then V'lamanu Asar Chametz, Asar Matzah, and we do another Hekesh, and we see just like there's 10 for chametz, there's also 10 for matzah. So Minai, what's the source? Tamomer al chalos lechem chametz, because the chalos lechem chametz can negate chametz have a matzah. Corresponding to the 10 loaves of chametz, you have to bring 30 loaves of matzah, but it has to be the same amount of 1 Yisron for each loaf. According to Rabbi Shmuel, it's a question, because it's himenu v'davar acher. So the Gemara says, no, taviu you say already. No, the extra taviu is extra, and so therefore that's a limud to teach us that this specific law, that the loaves of the matzah loaves get the same amount as the chametz loaves, the same amount to be surrounded. Okay, now we finish the chapter. Pesach eno nechal el chatzos. The Pesach is only eaten until chatzos. Montana is the source of our this idea that the Pesach is only eaten until chatzos. And Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Omer nemer kan b'layla. It says with respect to the Korban Pesach in Egypt that they could eat it on this night, and it also says about the firstborn, I'll go through Egypt on this night, and I will strike them until midnight. Just like Malchus Bechor was until Chatzos. Avkan also by the eating of the Pesach ad Chatzos. So Amrle Rabbi Akiva, as Rabbi Akiva says, don't you have the ability to eat the Korban Pesach until you left in the morning? Ad Shas Klipazon. So doesn't that mean until the time of the morning? Imkain Matam Omar. I might think that has to be in the day only. But that it can also be in midday. So Rabbi Akiva argues Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and he says, no, you can eat it until the morning, not just till midnight. Whereas Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says you can only eat it till midnight. I don't know Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah when he said that you can only eat it till midnight. I don't know what it means biblically speaking, which is what our Mishnah is saying. Dilma Dirabanan, maybe saying rabbinically you can only eat until midnight, to make sure you don't mess up and to keep you away from committing the sin of kares by not eating it properly. The Gemara says, "Imkain my ela achatzos." Why does it use the language of only until midnight? Ela kiyasim. It's like the other languages where the Mishnah says ela ma'asam diaraisa, just like it says ela menuya, ela let's leave that. You can only eat it to those registered. You can only eat it to the roasted diaraisa. It's biblical. Afkan name diaraisa. Also, in this case, the Korban Pesach, according to Rabbi Ben Azar, can eat until midnight is only until midnight is biblical speaking. And that's the concept, according to those who are strict, to eat the afikomen by midnight. It's because they say the afikomen is a stand-in for the Korban Pesach. And according to Rabbi Ben Azar, the Korban Pesach had to be eaten until midnight, whereas Rabbi Akiva says could eat it until the morning. So anyway, that is today's daf. God willing, we'll return to you. Ezu Makovan, Baruch Hashem.
Thank you.